Okay. My name is Asha Dolner. I was born in Stanislavov, which is the southeastern part of Poland. Our family consisted of my parents and two older sisters, Rachela and Dushka. When I was 5 years old, my father moved the family to a small place in the mountains. It was a resort place, a most picturesque resort place, and it was called Tatarów. My two older sisters remained in the city because they were going to school already. I went with my parents, and after I finished the 4th grade, I joined them in the city because Tatarów had only 4 grades in a one-room school building. We led a very normal, nice life. My father was a merchant. He had a general store. But when I was 7 years old, my mother passed away, which was a very painful thing for all of us, especially for me being the youngest. My father eventually remarried after a few years. After I finished school in 1938, and my older sisters also finished school before me, but my older sister got married in May of 1939, and she lived in Stanislavov. Dushka and I, we were working in our father's store. September the 1st, 1939, the war broke out. Germany invaded Poland. And as we were bracing ourselves for the German invasion, we found out that the foreign minister of Germany and the foreign minister of the Soviet Union made a non-aggression pact and divided Poland. The western part went to Germany, the eastern part to the Soviets. So we were under the Soviet occupation. And even though Poland bordered with the Soviet Union, we knew very little about them. It was a very closed society. All we knew that they were communists, nothing else. Life changed drastically after they came in. First of all, they nationalized my father's store, kicked us out from our villa, and we moved into a small cottage, which we happened to have in the backyard. Everybody had to work. My sister got a job as a secretary and I as a bookkeeper. But even my father had to go to work. And the only job they could come up for him was to be a night watchman at a lumber yard. They considered my father a capitalist by their standards. And we lived in fear of being deported to Siberia. In retrospect, I wish they would have deported us so my family would have survived the war. Most people, even no matter how hard life was in Siberia, but almost everybody survived. In June of 1941, the Germans suddenly broke the pact and invaded the Soviet Union. The Soviets started to retreat immediately, and in the process, they took along young men, and among them was my sister's husband. He tried many times to run away, but he didn't succeed, and he didn't know at the time how lucky he was that he didn't succeed. Had he come back, most likely he would have perished like everybody else. For 2 months, we were occupied by the Hungarians, who happened to be at the time the Germans' allies. and it wasn't too bad under the Hungarians. They certainly liked the Jewish people better than the Ukrainians. They hated the Ukrainians with a passion. But after 2 months, the Germans occupied, and a reign of terror started the minute they came in. First of all, they arrested all Jewish professionals, and we never saw them again. And then they took us, all Jewish people, to manual jobs. I cannot think of a job that I, my sister, and all other people were not doing. We even worked in a quarry splitting stones in bitter cold weather. It was by then already November, and this was a very severe climate where we lived. We used to go to work very early in the morning. It was still dark, so we carried like hurricane lamps, and we were sitting outside and splitting cracks. And one day, when my sister and I returned to our cottage, we found Gestapo men in our apartment, and they were arresting our father. I'll never forget the look on his face, pleading like we should help him. We were begging and crying the Gestapo people. They should not take him, but they took him, and then we found out months later that they tortured him and killed him. After the Gestapo people left together with my father, we were urged by friends and family to go into hiding. So we just grabbed coats and scarves for our heads and handbags, whatever little money we happened to have, not thinking that we will never see our home again. We spent the night with friends, and early in the morning we were told that indeed the Gestapo was looking for us. So we decided to run away. We had a cousin who had a farm about 25 kilometers from our village. So we started to run early in the morning along the river bank. It took hours to get there, and on the way we were eating snow. We arrived totally exhausted physically and mentally. We were received with open arms by our cousin and his family, and assured that that place was very peaceful. And indeed it was, for just a few days. One day when we were sitting and eating lunch, we heard screams, cries, and what happened? The Ukrainian peasants made a pogrom. They started a pogrom. They were chasing men, women, and children and clubbing them to death with hatchets. I don't know how, but my stepmother and sister, we somehow ran into a barn and were hiding in a hay loft. And the screams and cries were going on for several hours, and then everything quieted down. Apparently, they killed everybody. So we were thinking how we can run away from that place. What the peasants did, they made like fire bonds around different places, and also around that barn where we were hiding. In case somebody will escape, somebody was hiding and will escape, they will catch. Lucky for us, they had a lot of moonshine to drink, and they fell asleep on the grounds. And we took advantage of that, jumped down. It was a 1-story high. Because there was snow on the ground, we didn't break any limbs. And we started to run back the same way as we came along the riverbanks. We arrived, we stopped in a village before our. Of course, we couldn't go back to our village, so we stopped, and this was a very known, famous ski resort place. It was called Volusia. And we had friends there, so we were trying to get to their house, but we did not walk together. It was too dangerous. And our stepmother was caught by the local militia. We could hear that she was asked who else was with her, and she said, "No one, I'm all by myself." They took her, and next day she was executed. Meanwhile, we reached our friend's house, and they knew that it would be too dangerous to keep us in the house, so they put us in an ice cellar, and we were sitting all day long there. In the evening, they took us to their living quarters. But our legs were frozen stiff, and it took 2 men to help us just a few steps to walk over from that ice cellar to their home. Our friends realized that we will not survive staying all day long in an ice cellar. We will freeze to death. So what they decided, they divided us. My sister went into hiding to one family, and I went to another. And meanwhile, they got in touch with our older sister, Rachela, who was in Stanislavov. And by then, she was already in the ghetto. And she was thrilled that the 2 of us are still alive, and she was looking forward we should join her. But before I tell you about how we escaped to Stanislavov, an awful, terrible thing happened October 12, 1941 in Stanislavov. The Nazis wanted to create a ghetto, so they had to reduce the Jewish population. They rounded up 10,000 Jewish people, marched them to a cemetery. There were big pits. They told the people to undress, took away their valuables, and were shooting a whole day. Whoever fell in the pit, even some people were not dead. Other people fell on top of them, and they suffocated to death. My sister Rachela was expecting a baby at the time, and she was at that cemetery watching, seeing what was going on. She saw her father-in-law being killed. Can you imagine her state of mind? A few weeks later, she gave birth to a baby boy. Meanwhile, our friends tried to figure out how we could go from Volusia to Stanislavov. It was like, I would say, 120 kilometers. There was a Polish chauffeur who was driving a German car, and he was going to pick up a high German official who was coming back after Christmas vacation from Germany, but he was to meet him in Krakow. So he agreed. I'm sure they paid him very nicely for it. We never had a chance to pay these people back because none of them survived. Anyhow, that guy put us on the floor in the car, covered us with blankets in case the car's being stopped, they should not see us. And then when we arrived in Stanislavov, Rachela arranged to have us smuggled into the ghetto. We were extremely happy to be together with our sister and the baby nephew. But the happiness didn't last long, because life in ghetto was just horrible. Day or night, SS men would come in, drag out people, either from the apartment or if they happened to be on the street, and either kill them on the spot or deport them. We found out that if we'll get jobs, good jobs, especially outside the ghetto, that we will be protected. So naturally, everybody tried to get a job. My middle sister, Dushka, she got a job with a group of other young Jewish women to clean apartments for German families outside the ghetto. I got a job on the Gestapo Wirtschaftshof, which meant a farm. And how it worked, at 6 in the morning, SS men would come to the ghetto gate, pick us up. We were a group of over 100 people, men and women, and march us toward that farm, which was on the outskirts of Stanislavov. We could not walk on the sidewalk. We were considered subhuman, and of course we had to wear the armbands with the Star of David. The work was back-breaking. We worked in fields for 12 hours a day. They gave us very little food, a watery soup and a ration of bread, and this was it. So we were continuously hungry, and because of that, I worked in tomato fields. I ate tomatoes all day long, and from all that acid, my legs got so swollen that many times I hardly could drag myself. About in June of 1942, when we returned to the ghetto, our group, my older sister was standing at the ghetto gate. Her eyes were swollen from crying. What happened? They arrested the whole group of my other sister, Dushka, as they were returning after a day's work at the ghetto gate. The Gestapo arrested them and took them away. I had to go back to work in the morning. When I came back to work, the gardener, who happened to be Polish, he asked me and a friend of mine we should take over a bouquet of flowers to one of the SS officers whose birthday happened to be that day. So we went, and he told me the name. I walked over to that man. It was taking place in the courtyard of the Gestapo, and he thanked me very much for the flowers. He was super polite. And as I turned to go back to work, I've noticed that the whole group of my sisters was lined up against the wall to be executed. So I ran back to the same officer to whom I presented the flowers a minute before, and I begged him to release my sister. I said, she's the one that striped trench coat. Please let her go. He drew a gun and said, if you won't run away, I'll shoot you like a dog. I ran away. I hated myself for being a coward, and this must have been one of my worst days of my life. When I came back home, in the evening, and I told my sister what happened. she embraced me and said, "How foolish can you be? By now you should have known better than to ask a Nazi for mercy. He would have killed you, he wouldn't have released Dushka, and I would have lost you both." From then on, both of us were terribly depressed. We missed Dushka very much, but life had to go on. I had to go to work, and my sister had to take care of the little baby. But in the ghetto, you could have seen that things were going worse and worse. Each day when I had returned after work, I saw people dying from starvation and all kinds of diseases. People looked like skeletons. It was terrible. And just to tell you how hungry I was, that one time I was working in a little garden in front of the commandant's villa. And there was his dog eating some food. There was some dog food or whatever they gave on that dish. And the dog went away and left some food. And I was so tempted to crawl over and eat what the dog left. But the only thing what stopped me was that I was afraid that commandant, he many times was standing behind the curtains on his, there was a balcony, and he would stand in his room behind the curtains. And if he would see me eat the food that the dog left, he would have killed me. Because once a girl stopped, she couldn't carry the heavy bricks. So he saw her, and he shot her, killed her on the spot. So this was the only thing that stopped me from crawling over and eating what the dog left, to eat what the dog left. It must have been about September of 1942. It happened to be Jewish high holidays. We were not taken back to the ghetto for the night. And we wondered why. We knew that something must be going on in the ghetto. They kept us for several days on the premises, for overnight. They put us up in barracks, on bunk beds. And then they took us back to the ghetto for the night. And as we entered the ghetto, the first thing what we've noticed, the whole Judenrat, which meant the Jewish council, they were hanging from lamp posts. When I reached our little apartment, the lock was broken, and when I walked in, no sign of Rachela or her baby. Whatever little food we had left, like dried peas, beans, and broken glass, broken dishes, everything was scattered on the floor. I found out from a neighbor who was hidden and then came out when it quieted down, that they killed a lot of people on the street or deported them. That night, I did not cry. I was just very angry. And I swore that I'll do anything to run away. I knew that the chances were very minimal. But what did I have to lose? So I decided next day, when I came back from work, I went over to a man that I knew he was making forged papers. and I got some document. If you were caught with that paper, it wasn't worth the paper it was written on, but it gave you a little bit of security. But I also decided I needed cash if I would like, if I'll run away, I have to have cash. So I started to put on layers of clothing from my sister, from my brother-in-law, and took it to the place of work. We had Polish workers who were not slave laborers like we. They were coming in the morning, they were being paid for their work, and in the evening they went back home. They had special permits. And because it was wartime and you couldn't buy things, they were more than glad to buy whatever they could. And this was going on for several days. One day, as we were marching to work, one of the assessmen noticed my layers of clothes. He stopped the whole group and took me into a police station. He told me to undress, and I knew that I had that forged document in my bra. And if he'll see this, this would be my death sentence. So when he turned his head for a split of a second, I took out that document and put it in my panty. A minute later, he said, take off your bra. And then he said, put on your clothes. The rest he took away and go join the group. First of all, I couldn't believe it that he let me go. And neither did that whole group. They were sure that they will kill me there. I walked out and they told me I looked like a ghost. So naturally, this was the end of my venture of cashing to accumulate more cash. Whatever cash I had, this was it. And a few months later, the Germans decided to liquidate the ghetto. They wanted to make Judenrein, free of Jews. They kept us, and there was another group of people in another factory or whatever. They just kept us because they still needed us. But we knew that our days were numbered, because now they didn't take us back to the ghetto anymore. They put us up on the Gestapo grounds and barracks. But one night I woke up and I saw lights and I saw SS men standing. I was on the third tier of the bunk bed. So quietly I sat, my bed this way, the bunk bed, and my friends this way. And I woke up and I said, Tilja, quietly, what's going on? She says, shh, be happy. They didn't call our names. Go back to sleep. So, and women were standing getting dressed. And there was a little shelf between our bunk beds, and on that shelf was a book. And one of the SS men reached up for that book, and he looked at it and he says, America, USA. I happened to get a book there somewhere that it was America, USA. And he looked at it, and at that time, this was already end of 42, America was participating in the war. So now I really thought I'm in big trouble, because I expected him to ask, who is reading that book? And naturally, I'll have to say I, otherwise he would take everybody. But luckily, he just said, oh, America, USA, put it back up and marched out with these women. They told the women that they called a few names that they are being taken someplace else for a job, but they were all executed the same night. So we knew that, and now, as long as the ghetto existed, my chances of running away were much better than now. Now we were like in a concentration camp, surrounded with barbed wire, and I did not think that I had a chance anymore to run off. So, but one morning when we came to work, we found out that one of the men who worked was a Jewish man, that he disappeared. We all were glad for him, but we wondered how, when, what, we didn't know. The same day, late afternoon, a friend of mine, as we were walking back to the barracks after a day's work, and we were all dragging ourselves, she says to me, you know, there's a Polish lady, she is looking for you, she has a letter for you. I said, for me? It's impossible. I don't know anyone from the other side, meaning the Polish Gentile people. She says, yes, she asked by the name and she has a letter. So she took me over to that woman. And indeed, she gives me a little note from that guy who disappeared. His name was Philip. And he says, if you are interested to run away to Warsaw, follow that woman's instructions. You can trust her fully. So what she told me, she gave me 1 hour time. She says, go in your barrack, take out the best dress you have, put on nice clothes, nice shoes, and don't tell anyone what you are about to do. So I walk in there, and we were 20 in that room, and that 20 women sitting on the bunk beds, and they were just looking at me. I went over to the suitcase, I took out a black dress, silk stockings, black shoes, put on lipstick. Nobody wore lipstick while we were working there in the fields for a few years. Anyhow, they didn't ask me anything. They just looked at me as if I were crazy. So I said to myself, how can I walk out and not tell them anything? These are my friends. You become so close under such circumstances. So I told them, I have a chance to run away. It's 1 in a million that I'll succeed, but still, I'll take that chance. And they all said, may God be with you. At least you have a chance. We are here doomed. And I walked out, and that lady was waiting for me. She took me under her arm, and we had to go through a gate where 2 SS men were standing and show the ID. She brought for me an ID from a friend of hers who also worked on the Gestapo grounds. So I had to pretend that I'm Polish. The problem was that a lot of SS men knew me because many times I worked during the night in the hot house. And in wintertime, they would come in because they were cold. So 10 feet before I reached that little gate, the gardener's assistant, who was Ukrainian, he saw me all dressed up. He was like confused for a moment. And then he says, what are you doing? And I said, stay well, Michael, and kept on walking. Had he pointed me out to the SS man, I wouldn't have been here today to tell the story. I walked out. On the other side was waiting another lady. She went into to the barrack, took out my small suitcase, and then walked out. And we started to walk on that long boulevard, which was you saw only military men and mostly Gestapo people. This was the nicest section of the town, and there were many apartments. It was near the park, and the Gestapo families lived there. So you saw no civilian people. I was shaking like a leaf, and these two women kept on saying, walk normally, keep your head up. And I still was clutching in my fist the armband with the Star of David. Finally, we reached another street where we saw already civilians, and I still was not sure that I am being taken to where Philip was, because you heard so many times that people betrayed. They took your money and betrayed you and took you to the police station. There were always rewards for people, for Polish people or Ukrainian people who brought in Jews to the police station. So no matter how nice they were, I still was distrustful. Finally, when we reached and I saw Philip, and there was another man that his family, Philip had a sister, a brother, and a mother in Warsaw living under an assumed name, and they sent that friend who looked like a Polish guy, didn't have a tall Jewish traits. So he took him out, and then that's how they arranged for me. So in the morning we left for Warsaw by train. We were sitting in separate compartments. One is caught. We don't know anyone. We are by ourselves. When we arrived in Warsaw, Philip was taken to his family, who had an apartment, and me they took to a little hotel that the manager of the hotel knew that I was Jewish. She helped in a way, even though we paid, but what did this amount to in such a situation? She helped people who ran away from ghettos and other places, but we could only stay 2 or 3 days, and then we had to leave to make room for others. So I had an address of a friend who ran away a few months, like 6 months before, and that one of Philip's friends took me over there, and they gave me pointers. They told me what to do, that I should become a maid, a nanny, whatever, so I'll have a room and board. And they introduced me to a woman who was finding jobs for people. So my first job was as a nanny to twin baby boys. I knew nothing about taking care of babies. I was the youngest home, and I had nothing to do. But, so 4 days I lasted on that job, and I knew that I don't know what to do. So even the parents of the babies wanted to keep me. I said, no, I'm sorry. So I left, and I got another job as a maid, and also taking care on a 2.5-year-old child. This was a much better job for me, even though the lady expected me to clean the house and to cook even. But she said, if you will not do these chores, it's okay too, as long as you take good care on my child. And this I did. I played with her, and we had a good time. And it was a really a good job for me, and it was 2 blocks away from the Warsaw ghetto. At that time, this was April of 1943, and that time was that famous ghetto uprising, which lasted a few weeks, and I could see from the balcony what was going on there, and it was just horrendous. I saw mothers jumping with their children into the fire. And after a few weeks, eventually they also liquidated the ghetto, they killed everybody, deported, and that's it. I could have stayed on that job, but somehow I felt, I was afraid that that some members of the family were suspicious, started to be suspicious of me being Jewish. So I decided to leave on my own. And I got a job in the other part of Warsaw with a woman who was a widow. She was a seamstress, and she had 4 sons. The work was very hard because I had to do the laundry by hand. There were no washing machines. And I just felt after a few months that I just cannot go on. And she was a very mean person, gave me very little to eat, to the point that at night, one time, I just could not sleep. I was so hungry, so I got up and went to the kitchen and took out a jar of preserves. And as luck would have it, the jar fell out of my hand and broke. And she came running to the kitchen. It woke her up, and I thought she will kill me. So then I worked still a month or so, and I really felt that I'll get sick. Very little to eat and very, very hard work. So I told her, I don't feel good, and I better quit. At that point, she said to me, you are a Jew, and I'm gonna call the police. She locked the door. I started to beg her. Finally, she let me go. Of course, I left half of my clothes there. She didn't let me take everything. I grabbed just a small thing. And as I was walking, I turned my head, and I've noticed that 2 of her sons were following me. So I started to walk faster and faster, and so did they. And I found myself in a part of Warsaw that I have never been before. Because, I was not that long in Warsaw to know the whole city. And they kept on walking up. I knew I cannot go back to that hotel because I would have endangered the lives of other people, because there were mostly Jewish people there. So I just kept on walking until I saw a shoemaker. So I ran in to that shoemaker's place and asked him about a restroom. And he told me it's the backyard. When I ran there, I've noticed a staircase. I ran on that staircase instead and went up to an attic and was hiding there. I could look down through the cracks whether these 2 guys were still standing. And they were, but then they eventually left. But I still waited until it was dark. Then I came down and took the first streetcar. And no sooner did I sit down when a German policeman appeared. He was checking documents from people because you had to have a special permit. It was past the curfew. It was past 8 o'clock. And no civilian was supposed to be unless you were a doctor or a nurse, you had some kind of a night job, so you had to have a special permit. Not only didn't I have a special permit, I didn't have even a document, a ID, nothing, because that ID that was issued in the ghetto was already for a year before, was not anymore valid. So he says, get up, and I'm taking you to the headquarters. And as we were standing and waiting for the streetcar to stop, and he put his hand on my shoulder, I not thinking much, I could see the next stop, and I saw there only SS men and policemen and military men. Not thinking much, I jumped out from the speeding streetcar. My handbag fell. I gathered quickly my stuff, put it back in the bag, I ran across the street and jumped on another speeding streetcar going in the opposite direction. Till today, I cannot figure out why that German didn't either shoot after me or jump too. I'm sure he could have jumped as good as I, if not better. So when I came on that other streetcar, I jumped on the wrong side because there was only on one side where you can go in and the other side was locked like. But since I just caught that car going in the opposite direction. So when a Polish girl who was a ticket taker, I told her, where is that streetcar going? And she said, it's going to the terminal. And she opened up for me the gate so I could go in and sit down. And when we came to the terminal, I spent the whole night in the cellar. Early in the morning, I went back to that hotel, and by that time, I met in that hotel Philip's mother and sister. They also encountered some problems where they lived, and they had to run away. Now I decided no more for me being a maid or a nanny. I'll rather work in a factory. It won't be easy because it was a big problem to find a corner with a bed where to live. But I said no more for me being a maid. So the first thing I had to do is find where to live. I went to the old city in Warsaw, where I have never been before, and there was a flea market, and I walked over to different people who were selling different things, and I said, do you happen to know anyone who has a corner with a bed for rent? And one said no, the other one said no. Finally, I came to an old lady who was selling bread, a few loaves of bread she had. And I said, do you know of anyone? She says, as a matter of fact, I have a corner with a bed, but I will not rent to a young woman anymore for nothing. I had very bad experience with the 2 last tenants and no more. Now I have a man, and I have room for another man or even 2 men, but no woman. But all I had to hear that she has a corner, I just couldn't let it go. So I started to ask, I said, please show me just your apartment. She says, what for? I'm not gonna rent it to you. I said, okay. And besides, she says, I still have 4 loaves of bread to sell. I said, I'll buy the bread and let's go. She was crippled with arthritis. She wore thick glasses. She didn't see good. She didn't hear good. And she walked with a cane. And as we were walking toward her apartment, she was telling me, she says, actually, I did have a nice young lady. She was from Częstochowa. She was a beautiful girl, blonde, blue eyes, but the super suspected her of being Jewish, so he called the Gestapo, and they came and took her away. You can imagine how desperate I was to get a corner where to live, that knowing this, what kind of a super they have, that I still was willing to take that chance. So we came to her house. She lived on the 5th floor, no elevator. We got up on the floor, on the 5th floor, and there it was Saturday late afternoon. This was the only time that that tenant of hers was home, because he was a baker and he always worked at night. But because it was from Saturday or Sunday, he never worked. So he says to him, Mr. Orpich, this young woman, she wants to live here, and you remember the problems I had with the 2 other women? I won't have her. And he looked at me and says, Mrs. Stanikowska, she looks to me like a decent person. She says, no, nothing doing. I won't rent it to her. So I said to her, let me just stay overnight, because by the time I'll come to the city, it will be past curfew. She said, okay. I said, I'll pay her for it. In the morning, I started again to ask her. And that baker also helped a lot. He started to tell her. Finally, she gave in for a month. If it won't work out, I paid her for a month in advance, and I said, if you won't like me, anytime you'll tell me to go, I'll go. But I told her also that I had a job. So early in the morning, I would leave the apartment, buy a newspaper and a loaf of bread, and go on a streetcar and go back and forth, and looking for ads, looking for a job. Finally, I succeeded to get a job in a printing place. They were printing pharmaceutical labels, and it was really a very good job. The boss was wonderful. We were like 20 people. It was not too big a thing. And as my life, I thought, is already shaping up, and I got a Ken card, which was a very important document. It was like a passport. And also it was, of course, forged. Actually, it was issued by the City Hall of Warsaw. What was forged was my name, but all other things were okay. My deathbed, when I was born, what year, and so on. And that guy who got it for me, he worked for the City Hall, and I paid him all the money I had on me. But it was worth it, because it really gave me a sense of security, and I had now a job, and I had a corner where to sleep, and that's all I needed. And as when I thought that my life is already on the right track, the Poles made an uprising against the Germans. This was summer of 1944. The Germans flattened the old city. 95% it was completely demolished. We were running from one shelter to the other. A lot of people were killed. A lot of people lost legs, arms. It was an awful tragedy, and after 6 weeks, we were told, the Germans called, that if we should come out from the shelter, otherwise they will put in they will throw in hand grenades and kill us. So we came out with our arms up, and the young people they deported, they put us in cattle cars and took us to Germany. Of course, I went as a Gentile. And the first concentration camp I was taken to was Flossenburg, which was a men's camp in Bavaria. We were kept there just maybe a week, and then we were taken to Ravensbrück. In Ravensbrück, this was a death camp for women. At the time, we didn't know it. They kept us a day and a night outside before they let us into the camp. It was very cold, miserable cold, raining. And when they took us in, they took us to showers and body and hair examination. They took everything away from us. Even my Ken Carter that it was so hard for me to get. They took the Ken Carter away. They took even my eyeglasses, which I wore from the age of 5. Can he stop? I must get out my leg for a minute. I have to get.
You've just been talking, not quite.
They took everything away, toothbrush, toothpaste, whatever, personal things. And as I said, even my eyeglasses, which I wore, I was 5 or 6 years old when I started to wear glasses. And they gave us thin patch dresses, wooden shoes, no underwear, no stockings. They kept us on a roll calls for hours and hours in that bitter cold weather. A lot of people fainted. The roof was leaky. I was again on top in the bunk bed, and the roof was leaking, and it mostly was a rainy season. It was late fall. They gave each one a cup, which we had to keep for coffee, that cup, and for the soup. And if you lost that cup, you didn't get coffee or soup. So what I did, I would take that cup, and when it was leaking, fill up the cup and poured it on the floor down from my third tier of the, this was in that barrack. And next to me was sleeping a woman. I better not say it because it maybe will be shown in schools. But anyhow, the only thing I did, I wrapped myself in that ugly gray blanket to distance myself as far from her as I possibly could. In the morning, early in the morning, they would wake us up and pick a few women to go to the kitchen and pick up the heavy kettles with coffee. So we carried, were 2 women carrying the kettle of water. Meanwhile, all the rest were standing at attention on the roll calls, and they didn't give us the coffee.
Pardon me, I wanted to just ask you a question.
Sure.
These were all Christian women?
Yes.
There were no
Yes.
Jews there?
No.
Yeah.
And mind you, how we were treated, and the Jewish people were much, much worse treated. There was a block with Jewish women. There were a block with the gypsies there. Ravensbrück was a big camp. Anyhow, we brought that hot coffee. They wouldn't give us to us while it was hot. We were standing at attention for hours. And when the coffee was good and cold, and so were we, that's when they gave us the coffee. And then for lunch, a watery soup and a slice of bread in the evening, and that's it. It was going on like for 2 weeks. Then came two men, we didn't know who they were, what. All we knew that they picked some girls, and a Nazi doctor was sitting in the courtyard. It happened to be a nice day at that time, cold but nice. He told us to undress the ones who they picked, and we had to run around that doctor. And he was just saying right, left. We didn't know what for. Finally, they took us again to showers, examined our hair and body, gave us a little warmer clothes. And as we were walking out from that Ravensbrück, it was a big gate, and on top, like on every concentration camp, it said, Arbeit macht frei, which means if you work, you'll be free. That was the biggest lie. Anyhow, as we were walking out, I said to my friends walking near me, I don't know where we are being taken, but one thing I know, it couldn't be a worse hell than the one we are leaving. And sure enough, we were taken again into cattle cars, and we were brought to Spandau, which was on the outskirts of Berlin. We were put up in a huge hall, 1,000 women, all from different nationalities, not Jewish though. There were German, there were from all over, Italian, Polish, Ukrainian. And in the morning, we were marched to a munitions factory. Instead of SS men, these were SS women. And they were even more cruel than the men. They were really cruel women. And we were working 12-hour shifts. 1 week we worked daytime, 1 week at night. We carried heavy bombs from one machine to the other. It was a very, very back-breaking job. One time, just across from our hall was, I didn't know, there were Jewish women from Hungary working. And they carried, like, if our bombs weighed, let's say, 30 kilo, theirs weighed 40 or 50. And one woman she looked terrible. And I saw her, and I happened to have a piece of bread on me, which was considered like today, if you would give me a diamond, wouldn't be as valuable, no way, as that piece of bread. And when I saw that Jewish woman, my heart went out to her because she looked horrible. So I gave her that bread, and she wouldn't take it. She was afraid. She thought it's some trick. Who would give a piece of bread? And I couldn't tell her. First of all, she couldn't understand my language, and I couldn't understand hers. She was Hungarian. But I said to her, take it in Polish. So she looked around, and finally she took it and ran away with it. Well, now we are coming already. It's April 1944. I must also say, even when we came back to our barracks after a 12-hour work, whether it was daytime we worked or nighttime, when we wanted to lie down and just sleep and relax, they made an alarm, chased us outside, and always either gave us some extra work or we had to just stand in a roll call. And it was getting worse and worse, and food also was getting very skimpy. One of the mechanics in the munitions factory, he was an SA man. you know, SS, and the brown shirts were called SA men, which means SA. He could speak Polish. I could speak German, but I wouldn't admit because they would have been suspicious. Polish people couldn't speak German, very few. So I wouldn't admit, so I didn't want to speak German, but he spoke a little Polish. And I said to him one day, I felt he's friendlier. So I said to him, would you please bring me a little salt tomorrow, because the soup they give us, no salt, nothing. He said, I would love to, but we don't have it. He said, do you know my wife was standing in line yesterday for a whole day to get cabbage, and she came home empty-handed? For me, this was the best news I could bring back to the barracks. If a SA man's wife was standing a whole day for cabbage and didn't get it, what did it tell you? That they are in deep trouble, the Germans, and the war must be coming to an end. So we were rejoicing when I came and told the girls in the barracks this. And surely enough, every day we had to interrupt work and run to the shelter. They didn't, not because of us they took us to the shelter, but they wanted to go to the shelter, as women. So naturally they couldn't leave us, they were afraid we'll run away. So they took us to the shelter too, and for us to go to the shelter was a picnic. We would start singing because we knew it. We loved when we heard the bombs. We knew that if the war has to end, we have to see some action. And I was so convinced. I wish I could be today as convinced and have such faith that no American or English bomb will kill me. This is impossible. I'm Jewish. They wouldn't kill me. They are two nice guys. That's how I felt. But they were petrified, the Germans. And finally, they marched us. They wanted to march us toward the American front because they knew that the Americans will be much more lenient than the Soviets, and they were right. But we were close to Berlin, and the Soviet army was closing in near Berlin. So they marched us, and I saw the German army in a total disarray, in a total chaos, which was wonderful for me. I felt so good about it, but I also knew that it's a big danger for us to march with them because they will get frustrated and they will kill us. So I talked into, even though I was the youngest, I talked in 4 women to try to run away from that march. I said, what do we care? Who liberates us? All I know, the sooner the better. And that's it. So we tried a few times. What did we do? We were marching through the fields. So we were pretending we have to use the bathroom, to sit down in the field. And once our group passed us, that's okay. So a few times they caught us and we had to join. And then the 4th time we succeeded. We remained in the field. And since it was such a chaos, it was unbelievable to see that heroic German army. They were such big heroes for the Jews. But here, they didn't know what to go. They were running in circles. So we remained, and I met a Soviet girl, and I asked her, are here Polish families? We knew there must be farmers that they were brought from Poland. She says, yes, I'll take you over there. She took us over, And early in the morning, we were liberated by the Soviets. The first thing what they did, the Soviets, we were just 5 women. They saw how we looked and how hungry we are. They took us to a German house. The Germans all deserted their homes. They all ran away from that part because this was near Berlin, and they knew the Soviets are closing in. So they left the homes and they ran away. They took us into a cellar, and had the war lasted 10 more years, they had enough food. There were all kinds of preserves and sausages and bacon and ham and sugar, honey, and we were like wild animals. One found sugar. Look, sugar. We took like that. Honey, we drank honey. We were like animals, and what I cannot get over is that we didn't get sick. A lot of people died after the war when they started to eat normal food, but we ate like animals. And then, when we had enough to eat, they took us up to the living quarters, and as we walked in to get clothes, because we had only the patched dresses, so each one of us got a little suitcase and packed clothes. I even found shoes. I have big feet, but German women have big feet too. So I was able to get shoes. And as I walked in a bedroom, there was an old lady lying in bed, and she naturally spoke only German, and that Soviet soldier was with us. And she started to call. So I went over to her bed. At that point, I wasn't afraid to admit that I speak German. And she said to me in German, "Please, please, ask the soldier. He should shoot me. My family ran away. They left me. I am sick. I am old. And there's no one to take care of me. Please, ask him to shoot me." So I went over without any reservation. I said to him, "You know, she wants to be shot because she has no one and she is old and sick." He looked at her and said, "I wouldn't waste a bullet on her, let her croak." And with that, we walked away. Then we got a baby buggy and put our cases on. And I said to the girls, "We cannot stay here," because it was a very small place and there were only the first patrol. I said, "We are not staying here. We are young women." I was the youngest, but I had, in that respect, more sense than they, because I went through more than they did. These were Polish women. Okay, they were under the German occupation, but they didn't suffer what we did. I saw the Polish army retreating, and then I saw the Hungarian, and then I saw the Soviets retreating. So, you know, I had more experience. I said, "We are not staying here. We are going toward to meet the Polish army." We knew there was a Polish army which was formed in exile in England and also in the Soviet Union. And sure enough, we met the Soviet army, and they provided for us horse and buggy, and we went to the next city, and then eventually we went back to Warsaw, not by train, but it wasn't a passenger train, it was just an open platform. And that's how we came back to Warsaw. It's May 8, 1945. I'm sitting in Warsaw on a bench. Warsaw was in a ruin. All bridges were torn down. If you wanted to go from one place to another, there were little boats that took you. but I'm sitting and watching the Soviet Army victory parade. It's May 8th. Officially, the war is over in Europe. And suddenly it hit me. I am already free. The war's over. I am free. But what about? I am all by myself. I have no one left in the whole world. Who am I? What am I? And that realization was an awful thing. But I didn't let it. I said, I was fighting so hard to live through the war. All I wanted is to live just long enough to see the defeat of the Nazis. This would be good enough for me. But now that I did survive, I think I want to live. And I knew I'll have to rebuild my life. And eventually, my brother-in-law, who was taken to Siberia, he, coming back from Siberia, stopped in our city in Stanislavov. I never went back to Stanislavov. And he was told that all of us perished. So when I don't know whether I have time to tell the story, how I met him. It was in Boyton. By then, I lived with a family whom I met in Warsaw. They were all Jewish, but they lived under an assumed name. It was a family that had 4 daughters. They were young children. And when they heard I am alive, they adopted me. That man said, I have 4 daughters, I'll have 5 daughters. So I lived with them by then in Boyton. In Polish, it was called Bytom. It was the western part of Poland. And one day, as that lady and I, we were coming out of a bakery, she said to me, look at that beautiful baby. There was a horse and a buggy. There were sitting 2 men, and one of them had a baby on his lap. And I wouldn't look because I said, look, we are in a hurry. We went to pick up some cakes and we were going home. I said, no, we have no time. She says, please look, it's a beautiful child. And as I looked up, this was my brother-in-law holding that baby on his lap. They were going through Ukraine, and they saw this was a Jewish child. It was like a 2-year-old girl. And with him were friends, a couple, and they said, we'll take that child and we will raise this child. It was with Ukrainian peasants. So they paid these people whatever and took the child. But when my brother-in-law saw me and I saw him, I had some hopes that he may be alive, but he knew that we are all dead. He gave the baby to the people sitting next to him, and he jumped down and he said, my gosh, is it really you? I said, yes. But they were going to turn in they rented an apartment, and where I was walking out with that lady from the bakery, they were just driving in to the apartment they rented in the morning. They were actually going to go to Krakow. But when they arrived in Krakow by train, it was so raining that they said, what do we care where we go? Let's go further. So they stopped in Boyton. What it means, as we say in Hebrew, bashirat, predestined. So they stopped in Boyton, and that minute, just when we were walking out, they were gonna drive in. And naturally, he jumped down, and he didn't even go in anymore to the apartment. We took him straight to the friends that I was staying with. And then this must have been I would say, summer of 1945, and October 28, we got married in Boynton. So, and that's, my husband had here family in Daytona, and we came directly to Daytona Beach in January 1947. That's it.